Hello, comic creators. Welcome back to the Comics Connection podcast, the podcast where we talk to you about the business and creative aspects of being a comic book professional. My name is Kamal. The gentleman next to me, figuratively speaking, is Andy. And today we are going to attempt to pull out something positive from what is understandably a kind of negative situation. Last night, maybe early this morning, it was announced that John Cassaday had passed away at the age of 52. A lot of people who read comics, especially if you read the big two, you are going to be familiar with John's work, even if you are not familiar with him specifically. He has done amazing work on things like Planetary and Captain America and X-Men and a lot of other titles. He was extremely well known and well liked in the industry as a whole, both by the people who knew him directly, knew him personally, and knew him from his work. Andy, I know that you have some personal history with him and you knew him. So before we actually get into the life lesson part of it, you want to talk about how you knew John?
Sure. I knew him in the early and mid 2000s when I was an editor at Marvel. I did not work with him a ton, and I wouldn't say that I knew him like super well. We were not close friends. We were certainly friendly. Most of the work that he and I did together, and by that I mean I would hire him and then he would knock out of the park, was cover work. He did several covers, including a good run on Avengers covers and things like that. In my office and with me, and then he was already well into his run on Astonishing X-Men when I got moved over to working on the X-Men books. So again, it's not like I was involved hiring him. He and Joss Whedon and Laura Martin and Chris Eliopoulos were smoothly running that book and didn't need me giving them comments that they didn't need. So my job mostly was to get out of the way on that book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of speaks to some extent, you know, some of the aspects that made him such an incredible creator. The most obvious one is just how freaking good he was. He was remarkably talented, and specifically talented, I think, for making comics, because he was the level of his illustration was gorgeous to look at, just from a that is really well drawn and looks amazing standpoint. But he was also an extremely good and an extremely thoughtful storyteller in terms of your panel to panel to panel action. And then he also had a really incredible design sense. So when it came to, you know, most of the work that he did with me, like I said, was covers. Covers require a lot of design, understanding how design elements work together to create powerful imagery or balanced imagery or what have you. And he had a remarkable design sense, and he would often want to be involved in things like logo designs, or he was heavily involved in lettering placements. Like it was really important to him that the lettering, the word balloons and the captions were displayed on the pages in a way that made sense from not just a storytelling aspect, but also from a design standpoint. So they were pleasing to look at. And a lot of comics artists and writers don't get into it that deeply.
Hmm.
And that's not a knock against the other people. It's just, often when we have these conversations about who does well in the industry, we talk a lot about, the talent you have, and his talent. He was at the top level of all of those things, and those are like sort of the three biggest buckets when it comes to comic book storytelling.
Mhm.
He worked hand in, then kind of when you talk about talent, then you talk about, professionalism. And again, he was just really pretty easy to work with. He had strong opinions, and if you disagreed with him, you were gonna have a conversation, and he would often win because, again, he's so good at it. Uh, but he he didn't really approach it. I don't think I didn't feel like I didn't get into a ton of these conversations with him. But like I never felt like he approached it as a win lose. He approached it
Mhm.
as a. I mean, I think he was open to other ideas and comments, but he was demanding as a creator. He demanded excellence of everyone around him that he worked with, and I think, again, not in a way that made him a jerk, but in a way that just made everybody want to do their best.
Mhm.
Um, and he was very responsible about his deadlines, and if he couldn't hit a deadline, he would let you know, usually before you were hired him.
Mhm.
um and so, again, just from that professional, easy to work with aspect, he was again he was at the top. And also, he was really likable. He was nice to people, and he clearly loved comics, and I think he loved the community. And he was really close with a lot of good friends of mine, some of whom were, you know, uh, superstars like he became. A lot of whom were not. A lot of whom were not named people at all, or whose names
Mhm.
didn't even appear in the comics. But he still treated, as far as I know, he treated everybody with the same amount of respect and dignity, and it didn't really matter to him if you were a big name person or not. And so, you know, uh, you and I have talked about. We did our live session the other day about breaking into comics and having talent and professionalism and being nice and likable and approachable. And he was a really good example of someone who did all three of those remarkably well. Add to that that he was on the younger side when passing away, and it just it's a blow. Again, I didn't like I wasn't close with him, um but that news last night hit hit pretty hard, just from all those aspects kind of coming together.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of times when you're working and it's not really an intuitive thing in comics because a lot of times you're working in isolation and you're working on by yourself, but you do get to know quite a few people in comics because of the way Western comics are produced and structured and distributed and everything else. So you get to know people, and comics is small, so the people that know a lot of other people. So the kind of community that you build and the reputation that you have in that community is actually a very powerful thing, both when you're in it and after you leave it. And it seems like everyone who worked with him, like you said, they had they had this kind of thing that that's the kind of person that they want to work with. So if you're a comic creator and you're either just starting out or you've been in the game for a while and you're trying to understand when we talk about what you need to be in comics and to stay in comics, it seems like John would be a very good model for that because he had
Yeah.
the talent that actually separated him from a lot of other artists. He had the professionalism that people knew that when they needed him to do something, he would actually go above and beyond what they needed to get the books to be the way they needed to be. And he was the person that you would want to go out drinking with after. And,
Yeah, he was a
there's
fun guy.
literally, yeah, there's literally nothing wrong with that. Um, I mean, that's pretty much what the whole point of comics anyway. But the point I want to actually focus on is the age that he passed away and the the example, or not necessarily the example, but the idea that this is actually very a very appropriate time to say something that people listening to this will not want to hear. But if you are in comics, if you are creating anything that is going to last and maybe generating revenue, you it makes sense to actually think about and understand what's going to happen to all of that if and when you are inevitably not around anymore. So a lot of people that I know who are in their early 50s do not have a will. They have not done estate planning. They have not thought about creating a trust. They have not actually thought about any of the things that, you know, and this is not necessarily an apt analogy, but someone who was James Earl Jones's age probably thought about it at 93. John Cassaday at 52, maybe not. But if you're working as a freelance artist in comics and there's any kind of royalties that are due to you based on your contract and those monies keep coming in, when you're not around, where is that money going to go? Who is that money going to go to? Who do you want it to go to? And if you don't think about that and set that up and make sure that those structures are in place, once you're gone, the people who are in your life who are kind of left behind may not understand what you did well enough to know what to look for, who to talk to, or how to get all that in place. They may not know that you are owed royalties. They may not know you own a piece of this intellectual property that just got optioned by Netflix. They may not have any idea what's in your contracts. So to handle your estate planning, to think about your will, think about your, if you have a publishing company and you want that to continue on after you, it pays to actually think about these things sooner rather than later, because you do not know when later is going to be. Um, a lot of times comic creators that I know, especially if they're working on the freelance side, they're very focused on getting the next gig, hitting the next deadline, making sure the next project is done. And they're not necessarily worried about the executor of their will and leaving those people as their beneficiary for their royalty reports or transferring copyrights to them. It's not what they're thinking about, because final order cutoff is final order cutoff and they need to get that thing done when that thing needs to get done. But at some point it's helpful to take a step back and look at all of the things that you are doing, all of the things you're creating, all of the things that you own that may have value, and who do you want that value to go to? Otherwise, it all can just go away like tears in the rain. So that's it's not, if you're trying to process and understand and make sense of the passing of somebody who is a great talent in the industry, it is and it isn't the best time to also think about, okay, how does that impact what I'm doing and what I'm going to leave behind? Does that make sense, Andy?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's one of those things too that, at least in my case, I had a will drawn up. My wife and I had wills drawn up a little over 10 years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature of the businesses and freelance and that sort of thing, we actually looked at it a few months ago and we're like, this thing really needs to be updated. Like, it doesn't cover a
Exactly.
lot that it needs to cover. So that's the only other thing I'd add to it. We're in the process of getting it updated
Mm-hmm.
now, but like, if we do that every 15 years, that may not be it may not be super up to date when the
Well,
time comes.
I also just had mine done, and the attorney that I worked with for that, he recommended 5 years. Like every 5 years, take a look at it, see because what you have, what you don't have, who is around, who is not around, those variables might change. So 15 years
Right.
is it's
It's a
pushing it a
little
little
long.
bit. You might want to do 5. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
that sounds good.
in having something, is going to be better than having nothing. But once you have something, yes, then you get into the advanced levels of, oh, as new businesses get added, as new intellectual properties get added, you update lists and things like that. And but that's a story for another time. Um, so I think that's going to be as much positive life lessons we are going to get out of this tragedy. So uh, hopefully next time we have a podcast, we can talk about something fun.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, yeah. So
All
until the
right.
next time, I'm Gamal. He's Andy, and have fun with your comments.